Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to Upper Roommates. We have a crossover episode today with Tim Gordon from Rules for Retrogrades. Go check this out on his channel, too. He's going to be posting it on there. Today, we're talking about Catholic Republic, his book. And this is an interesting point of contention that I've noticed on the online Catholic area, the Catholic sphere, that what is America actually a Catholic nation, or is it a Freemasonic liberal nation that was founded back in 1776? Is it congruent with the principles of the French Revolution, or is it or parallel per se, or is it its own? Does it have its own special Catholic principles? And that's what Tim argues in his book. I would say that Tim has actually influenced me in a lot of ways, and I think he's influenced Andrew as well, especially in the areas of jurisprudence and states' rights, and also on the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. But essentially, I think where I want to start, and Andrew, you could hop in anytime you want, is that, Tim, why is America a crypto-Catholic republic, as you've said?
Well, I mean, I guess the best way to start out explication of what the book argues is what it's not arguing. It's not saying that America is peopled before this generation. Actually, this is the first generation measured just in February of this year with a generation that is more Catholic than Protestant. Zoomers, you guys. So congratulations. But I'm not making this argument about any of the previous 10, 11, 12 generations of Americans, that they were peopled, citizened by more Catholics than Protestants. Or I'm not even making the case that it's anywhere close, because it's not. Protestants were the primary people. They were Covenantist in the North, and they were Anglican in the South. And that's about all there is to it. And retard Protestants will say things like, don't you know that we were Covenantist in the North and Anglican in the South? Yes, I do know. But the case is that the ideas of America, and I don't just mean the Declaration of Independence, well, the document by which we broke with the old regime, the old English regime, or the new Constitution, or the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, which made a new regime. You have to break the old regime, make a new regime. This is how this process works. And then the third step really sets it aside as not just being a documentary kind of crypto-Catholicism that is important to America, but though those documents have to be real enough, they have to be arrest enough in the heart of American people that they actually want to see the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution embodied. So there are cultural moments as well that have to be embraced, and they're basically 6 major elements of crypto-Catholicism that are the most important elements of having a republic. So yes, it's crypto-Catholic in not only its ideas, some vague, abstract, universal thing, but moreover, there was a receptivity to the crypto-Catholicism, as long as it stayed cryptological, with the Protestants who peopled the early American Republic. And because it was overly cryptic, overly hidden, that made what was once it was labeled Protestant country, it was once accurately labeled Protestant. It's hidden in a hidden way. It was Catholic, labeled Protestant, and now it's functioning as secular because the ideas fade away. I'll say this though: here are those 6 notions. The basic premise of the Declaration of Independence is the natural law and the natural rights that are propositions stood for by the natural law. They're uniquely Catholic and uniquely Aristo-Thomist version of natural law and natural rights. Protestants flirt here and there with natural law, and they did in the 16th and 17th century. Guys like Buchanan, Rutherford, Grotius, Pupendorf, Locke, Algernon Sidney, they flirt with it, but they're not serious about it. I think First Things magazine said they dither from a kind of unwilling acceptance to an outright rejection, or some turn of phrase like that. But at any rate, the version of natural rights, natural law that has always been, I don't mean in a cryptic way, in a marquee way, in a mainstream way, mainstreamed by Americans, is a Catholic natural law and Aristotelian natural law. Same pace. The Constitution. What's the big idea of the Constitution? It is subsidiarity, styled after Pius 9, 10, 11, 12, Leo the 13th. There wasn't a term for subsidiarity before 1931, but states' rights and the idea of amity or concord in Aristotle, the idea that government has to be done locally. It's not just that it should be; it's that it's not really possible to make the call, whether you're a referee in soccer or basketball, from across the field. The call has to ontologically be made there. If you're going to go out to dinner with your wife, you can't just call in to the kids from across town. There has to be some governing person on the ground. That's where governance happens. It happens right there. So you get a babysitter. That's a natural law principle. The Catholic Church says it's natural. There's nothing to be found outside of the Aristo-Thomist tradition. And that's the beating heart of the U.S. Constitution prior to the Civil War and the 14th Amendment. But then the four cultural things, cultural elements, moments that make it real, where you break the old regime of the basis of the natural law and natural rights, and you make the new regime on the basis of subsidiarity, is how you enshrine these natural rights and natural law into the new regime. But then you have to have them be realized. And it's through, like all the framers said and all the founders said in the early country, you have to absolutely secure in the populace a kind of virtue ethics, virtue. They're all using this V word, which was something that Luther and Calvin and Melanchthon all hated. They hated Aristotle's virtue ethics. But you have all of John Adams and all these famous quotes from these Protestant dudes saying, it doesn't matter how good a constitution you have, without virtue ethics in the people, it's nothing. Okay, so virtue is the third thing, the first thing in the popular mind. You have to have a proper sense of public Christianity, the kind of humanism that emanates from public Christianity that's not forced into this irrevocable moral corner the way it is now. And that's why all 9 of the 13 states had an official state sect of Christianity, and the Constitution, until the 14th Amendment, assumed and legalized that all 13 states should have their own state sect of Christianity. The third and the fourth cultural points or overall elements, number 5 and 6, are you have to have a family economy. That's the only way that free enterprise can be done in a way that doesn't deify wealth, the way the Protestant. It's kind of all Joel Osteen. If you leave it to the Protestants, they all do a kind of prosperity gospel. They all kind of worship it. That's because they don't have sacraments where they get their daily grace. There's a guy called Baxter that said, without the quotidian grace of the sacraments, they turn labor and its fruits, wealth, into a kind of sacrament. And that's what Protestants do. And you hear boomers say it. Even a lot of Catholic boomers say stuff like this. And that's just not what work is for Catholics. Work's about supporting your family. And of course, we don't want, we want private property rights, private contract rights. We want free enterprise as right-wing Catholics. We don't want someone interfering, but we don't worship the wealth or the labor in the weirdly proto-Marxist, reductionist, materialist way that Protestants do. So you need to have a proper capitalist, free enterprise economy. You have to have Catholicism. And then 6th, to have a good energy tech sector, you said this one's more obvious, so I won't say much. You have to have, it's absolutely requisite to have a Catholic philosophy of nature. And the Protestants just reject that whole hog. So to have those 6 things, to have a republic, you have to have those 6 things. Those 6 things simply don't come from either the Protestant Reformation or the previous century from the secular left Enlightenment. That's why we look so different from France an enlightenment country. That's why we looked so different from the little Presbyterian Protestant theocracies they were setting up. It was a peopled Protestant nation with Catholic ideas, and that's what makes this right now around America's 250th birthday such a moment of power.
Yeah, and I think that the something I've noticed is because I've seen that your debate with Ryan Grant, right? And one thing I noticed, a lot of you guys kept on going into like the weeds, right? Versus like Algernon Sidney and the divine rights of kings and all that stuff. And this isn't me crapping on Ryan Grant or anything, but but the thing is that the reason your argument has influenced me a lot is because it just seems it's just right in front of you, right? It's because the natural law is something that you could just obtain by reason, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the American Republic was all about. I mean, even today, people are sitting there going, "Well, these are my kids. I make the decisions for them." Well, I don't like how this is going in my town, and why the heck? I mean, you've made the argument yourself, and I've used it with other people. If you look at a map, what does Honolulu, Hawaii, right, have to do with Washington D.C.? Like literally nothing, right? It's like it's asinine to me that it would make more sense for Puerto Rico to be a state versus Hawaii, right? And that's the weird thing to me, that people are like, oh well, no, like we could have this ginormous country, but at the end of the day, it's like no, it's consolidated in one power, and that takes the commonsensical local rule. I mean, G.K. Chesterton said that you should keep politicians close enough to kick them, right? Like you should know the guy on your town council, you should know the guy who's the mayor, right? But that seems that, I mean, maybe just because it's like a Romans 1 moment, people are, they're so clouded over in their judgment that it doesn't seem apparent to them anymore.
Yeah, I think, well, think about it this way, man. It's like you'll hear, I think Ryan Grant, this debate or whatever happened a long time ago, 6 or 7 years. I think he kept saying, aren't you really just trying to say that these liberal secular enlightenment ideas were Roman Catholic and that can never be? The answer is no, because the ideas of republicanism with a small r is a really, really, really old concept, older than Christianity. And a lot of people know in both Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and in the third book of the Politics, he says, look, there are three good forms of government, and you can really pick any of the three of them, whatever suits the people, the climate, the vegetation, the temperament of the geography the best. There's rule by one, rule by few, rule by many. A king, an aristocracy, or a republic, or a polity. And any of these three can go bad. And they go bad when the rule by one, the one ruler stops serving the common good. He starts serving himself, becomes a tyranny. Monarchy becomes tyranny. Rule by few, that your few rulers have become bad guys when they start self-dealing. They're self-interested, and they're no longer interested in the ens commune and the bonus commune, the common good. And same thing, pace the many. You can have many rulers, a kind of legislature that's the supreme branch that does good and cares about the bonus commune. But if they start self-dealing the way they undoubtedly have in America for many, many years, many, many decades, then it becomes what's called democracy. The democracy is the wicked form of the good rule by many. Oligarchy is the wicked form of the rule by few. Tyranny is the wicked form of the rule by one. Okay, so once you say that, then you have to buy the premise, whether you like it or not, that Thomas and Bellarmine and Augustine and Suarez and the whole school of Salamanca, like guys like De Soto, Mariana, Vittoria, they all were like students of the ancient Republican tradition. So this LARPy shit where they say, oh, well, this is just the democracy was born in the Enlightenment. It's just stupid. It's as stupid as Protestantism. It reduces to not knowing anything about history. The fact is, it's an old form of government. Thomas does say, and Aristotle did too, that if you have a good king, if you can guarantee your left side regime type, the good sides, of the good three, the best is a king. But how do you ever know if you're going to get a good king? How do you hedge? This is where you can hedge by the better the king is, the worse his perversion will be. And so the king's the best form of government, but tyrant's the worst. So they stack up like first best, but it's also sixth or first worst if it goes bad. So you're kind of hedging your bets by running with republics. They are wicked when they become democracies, which is what we live in now. But he also says you could do this mixed regime thing, which is kind of what the idea of America was, where you have three branches. One branch is monarchical, one branch is aristocratic, and one branch is fundamentally legislative or Republican. And that's kind of what we had. So I don't know. I think all Ryan kept saying, if I have to search my memory, is just that Bellarmine and Suarez and all of the other very Catholic dudes and Aristotle, Thomas, all the Salamancans, they didn't actually hold this view. They used terms in an outmoded ancient way, and I'm using intentionally the term in an equivocal way. This is just not true. If you hated Robert Filmer, who is like the court theologian to James II, I think, King James II, he makes up out of whole cloth this idea called the divine right of kings. That is not an old idea. See, all the dumb midwit LARPs think republicanism's a new idea. It's not. It goes back to before Plato and Aristotle. And they all the dumb midwits think that divine right of king is a very old idea. It's not. It's made up by, sometime around the late Tory period. And Robert Filmer is not necessarily its inventor, but he's the great popularizer. And Robert Filmer says himself, he's like, it's the papists that have reinvigorated this Greek tradition of representative government. And it's, he literally writes in defense of monarchy against representative government. He writes a text called Patriarcha that later on, John Locke and Algernon Sidney are going to just rail against Patriarcha Robert Filmer. Patriarcha was expressly written against Robert Bellarmine. Like literally, he's all over the liner notes. And I think he might even be in the subtitle, Patriarcha against Robert Filmer. So you could pick quotes from the first 10 pages of this thing. He's saying he's writing against the papists who have given this Republican tradition. So I guess I'm not sure. Well, the first thing I said, if that's more compelling, or this sort of segment, if that's more compelling, but you take them together, and now all of a sudden it sounds like I'm trying to have some wacky, mix all idea. I'm a Catholic, but I also am trying to have a republic or something like that. And I want to have my cake and eat it too. That's not what it is. The ideas play historically. They mix together quite nicely, because what I'm basically doing is just showing in the book that the history supports much more my view than someone like Ryan Grant's.
Yeah, and getting back to the way the American Republic was founded too, right? I mean, you see the degradation, especially what is it, the 16th Amendment, where the direct election of senators and stuff like that, right? Because like the whole point was, we have the three branches of government, but if you and because it comes from, the English Parliament, right, where the president is supposed to be a sort of monarchical figure, right, but it's checked and balanced. But the Senate was supposed to be the representative of the states. So first of all, when you get rid of the 16th Amendment, right, it's the 16th, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you get rid of the 16th Amendment, you get rid of the state representation, the direct state government representation, which is completely against subsidiarity, right? And
Exactly.
and at the same time, too, it introduces more of a mob rule. And so, and the Senate's supposed to be a more aristocratic sort of house, and the House of Representatives is supposed to be more of the democratic, this is the best among us that we put forth, the best among the common folk. But the people who are in the Senate, no, these are the people that the state government said, no, this is going to represent our interests in Washington enough. And That's something that I think a lot of Americans are out of touch with today. I mean, if anybody ever, I mean, it's never going to happen, unfortunately, unless there's just this mass public sway of opinion, right? Where we bring back, so to repeal the 16th Amendment. So many people would be like, well, this is against our American principles. No, no, no. The 16th Amendment is what's against the American principle, right?
Absolutely.
Because it gets rid of all of that's commonsensical about it.
Yeah, not to mention, I think it's Federalist 39, Madison. I think it's Madison and Federalist 39 says that what the Senate is to be is a body to give a cool and a deliberate sense of the people, which is exactly what you just described, Connor. It's like, you have the best of the hoi polloi over there in the House. Here in the Senate, we're elected once every 6 years. We keep our seats longer because we might be doing things that contradict our audience, which is what you do when you have a podcast. If you have any chutzpah at all, you're like, I'm going to do this thing that's for the overall bonus commune. It's for the common good, but I'm going to do it even though it's going to be unpopular. I'm going to give a cool and deliberate sense of the people, like the senator, I think Gracchus says in Gladiator. Well, I try to be a man for the people if I'm not always a man of the people. I think that's the whole rich tradition of senates or House of Lords that was lost with that move. And all those moves, all those changes that were made to the body were also changes that were made from what was supposed to be a part consolidated, part confederated U.S. Constitution to all consolidation. Another such move is my big beef after the passage of the 14th Amendment, 3 years after the Civil War ended in 1868. The 14th Amendment starts incorporating the first 8 amendments in the Bill of Rights against the states. Now, what was the Bill of Rights? A lot of people don't even know this. These were things that these were rights granted directly to citizens of each state that the federal government could not contravene. First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, whatever, all the way to the Eighth Amendment. But state governments were not ever defendants in such cases, adjudicating those rights. In other words, states could violate those rights, which is why we only got the Second Amendment incorporated. You only had a Second Amendment right in a liberal state to own a gun in 2010 after, was it McDonald or the Heller case? Heller was 2008. McDonald was 2010.
I think it was McDonald's.
Yeah. So I mean, like McDonald's, it sounds like that's a fast food joint. Yeah. You get the guns after that. That's because they incorporated against the state this rule that was really only supposed to bind what the federal legislature couldn't do. And that's why you even in the First Amendment, you have Congress. And this, by the way, this also, so it threw off the balance of power because states were supposed to be all able to do all kinds of stuff that the federal government couldn't do. And so now when you're saying, oh, states can't do it either, that's why everyone's so brainwashed after the First Amendment was incorporated in 1947 against the states as well as against the Congress. That First Amendment right that I'm always belly aching about is, Congress is even named, not the state legislatures, but Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That means Congress was not allowed to disestablish the 9 state establishments of Christianity, official state sects of Christianity. That was the way when the Bill of Rights was ratified 3 years after the Constitution was. The Constitution was ratified in summer of 1788. Bill of Rights was ratified as a promise made good on by the Federalists to the Anti-Federalists in the summer of 1791. And 9 of the 13 states had state establishments of Christianity and continued to afterwards because the First Amendment didn't mean what they reversed it into meaning with the incorporation of rights against the states at different times using the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. So the balance of power was thrown off. And I would just conclude like this segment here by saying there are, if you look at America's constitutional life, we have like newborn and adolescence, phase 1, phase 2, middle age, and then phase 3, our geriatric period. In the first period from 1776, when we declared ourselves independent of Great Britain, until the passage of the Constitution 12 years later, the entire government was run by a completely confederated style of rule, meaning no consolidation. There's really only one national branch. It was the Congress, which is a sovereign international immunity principle. These are all treaty government terms, meaning government between like a league of separate nations. Congresses, POTUSes, which is where we get federal. These are all treaty government terms. That's the proof. Congress, federal. You can get a whole lexicon of all the terms in early American history that are treaty government terms, proving for those 12 years, we were definitely strictly confederated. Now, what's pitched in Federalist 39 and 51 and 10 is a government that's half confederated, half consolidated, which is why you have all these concessions to subsidiarity in the states. And the early government until the Civil War, from 1788 until 1865, 1868, was really kind of two types of government. They called it an imperium in imperio and imperium. And it was, part consolidated, where it's rule from Washington, D.C., but largely confederated, rule by each state himself. And then after 1868, you move into pure consolidation. So the first phase is confederation from 76 to 1788. Then you get the part consolidated, part confederated rule once we move from the Articles to the Constitution from 1788 to 1868. And then from then to now, it's just been increasing. Hunger Games, like, District 1 rules everything. And it's pure consolidation, and it's grown more and more and more tyrannical. And it's not at all a republic anymore in any conceptual way.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, especially after the Civil War, that the American government at that point in time has become a lot more like an enlightenment government. A lot of historians and philosophers talking about the past 500 years have noted that since the time of the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, like you were talking about, we see this idea of divine right of kings, idea of increasing the size of the government, often for the sake of wars and whatnot. That leads to an expansion of bureaucracy and a destruction of civil and local customs. And the nation at its founding really didn't have those Enlightenment principles of big government. It really had more of the Catholic understanding of local rule, which, like, as you noted, the founders like Jefferson and Adams got from, was Algernon Sidney, because Algernon Sidney read guys like Robert Bellarmine, Suarez, and all that. So did the founders particularly, did they read a lot directly from these guys from the Jesuit schools, or was it mostly mediated through Sidney and all these guys? Like, how much did the founders know these Catholic thinkers directly?
Sidney was accused during his life of like ripping off, as in what we would call today, college profs would call it plagiarizing, Robert Bellarmine several times, actually, and he had to defend himself. So there's that. John Adams read, I think, De Soto and Mariana, I want to say. Jefferson had in his library a copy of Bellarmine. People argue about this. So I think this was one of the other nits that Ryan Grant was picking. How marked up was it? Was the book ever open? Stuff like that. But we'll put it this way. They knew of, this is the slam dunk, okay? They hated, one thing we have to do real quick is the Whigs were the party around the restoration of William and Mary in the 1680s that started to emerge as the parliamentary party. They took over for like 80 years. There wasn't a Tory in English government until George III, 80 years later. But the Whigs, after the Roundhead Revolution thing in like the middle of the 1600s, for those 30 years, what culminated in the William and Mary Restoration was a parliamentary revolt where they really became a, parliamentary constitutional monarchy. And the heroes of that were, of course, the 1688 thing was 1 year, and then 1689, Locke, who calls himself a Whig, strong Whig, publishes the two treatises 1 year later. Sidney was the Whig philosopher of choice for the 60s and 1660s and 1670s, and then Locke kind of became favored later. And so the Americans, the next century, almost the same decade of the next century, like the 1770s, they're reading Locke and Sidney, the two Whigs. Jefferson preferred Sidney over Locke even. A lot of people don't know that. And what they're reading are Locke and Sidney, who were Protestants, and Jefferson's not really, but Adams and most of the other guys in America who called themselves neo-Whigs were also Protestants, which we also acknowledge. So what they were doing is so you have the neo-Whig Americans reading the original Whigs from 90 years before, who are American Protestants, were reading the British Protestants, who were the originary Whigs, who themselves were reading in a hateful way, like hate reading, Robert Filmer, the great proponent of divine right of kings, who was also a Protestant, but he was a Protestant Tory. And he wrote his book Patriarcha expressly against Robert Bellarmine. And so the Whigs, like Locke and Sidney, were definitely we're borrowing against this Catholic and these papists, because Filmer hates the Catholic idea of, revitalizing republicanism. So you had Jefferson and Adams borrowing from Locke and Sidney, who were borrowing from Suarez and Bellarmine. And yes, there were a lot of Americans that were reading other what we would call minor political Catholic thinkers, like the Salamancans, but Adams was reading De Soto, Mariana. I have a whole chart of it all, but it's both direct and very sort of flagrant indirect influence, because they're reading the guy Robert Filmer, who wrote expressly against the original Republican theorist of the modern age, who was Robert Bellarmine. So it's unmistakable. It's not, you try to catch someone out on, Jefferson gave his whole library to the Library of Congress, and they had the Bellarmine book, and they weren't sure he ever cracked it open. That's not the point. The point is Bellarmine was known as the Riverhead, the fount of the river of modern defenses against Protestant Tories, that Protestant Whigs were like, well, we don't care that they're Catholic. We're with them in these Catholic ideas.
So I guess if Tim, if you got a few more moments, if I may ask one more question, then
Sure.
Essentially, I guess when it comes to the American founding, right, and we're talking about these Catholic principles and ideas that are evident there, and then there's the other side of the argument then from say popes in the 1860s, right, and or 1800, the 19th century. Whether that's Gregory the 16th or, as you famously dubbed him, Blessed Pio Nono, Pius the Ninth, that essentially indifferentism, not having a state established religion with Catholicism and liberalism and freedom of speech, these are all things that are condemned, and these are things that, weren't in a sense, enshrined in the Republic. Now, obviously, the other side of the argument is, well, it's because it was left up to the states. But if you want to explicate on that quick, or maybe kind of address that's something that's kind of popped up into my head recently, and that I've been kind of trying to work out a little bit. And so I'd love to hear your take on that.
Specifically, would you specify the call of the question a little bit more, Connor? What do you?
So how do you address that? Say when the Bill of Rights were made, there was no state established religion of Catholicism. Freedom of speech was obviously is the First Amendment. How do you link the Catholic principles that are clearly evident in the founding with republicanism, right, with those things that were condemned by popes later on, but I mean that are still truths that were there beforehand. Is that succinct enough? Or
Sure. I mean, freedom of speech is a really conspicuous nit to pick also, and just shows for guys, I guess, like Ryan Grant, shows an impoverished sense of history. Again, I'm not trying to throw shade, but freedom of speech always existed as a spectrum. So the Catholic Church was not, even at the time of the codex or the index, against freedom of speech, right? I mean, it never means an absolute freedom. The same thing as freedom of property or freedom of contract. It doesn't mean that you're for, prostitution contracts or contracts to sell your kids. Freedom, sure. It's just a retarded argument. It's a stupid argument. I don't really believe anyone believes it, and no one's silly enough to really believe that because you think, oh, freedom of I mean, what are the two halves of being pro-free enterprise? It means you're, for private property and private contracts, freedom of property, freedom of contracts, right? That doesn't mean you can, so you're for, it should be legal to hire hitmen. That's a contract killers. No, not all of them. I mean, so once we get into what is freedom of speech, I mean, what we're doing here is freedom of speech. It requires some amount of freedom of speech to defend Catholic principles the way you do on your podcast or I do on mine. It requires freedom of speech to do anything other than perjure yourself. It's not inclusive. That body of rights, that suite of ideas does not include perjury or, blasphemy necessarily. For most of modern history didn't, or yelling fire in a crowded building, right? Or fighting words. Or there's so many instances of free speech that even in its more 20th century liberal iteration never included perjury, never included yelling fire in a crowded building, never included prurient interest. And as the Supreme Court has made it amply clear. But I should say that, again, early America, which is all I really defend. I'm not defending. Yes, America does look much more like some secular Enlightenment hellhole now. That what I'm saying is, if we get back to original principles and maybe do them better than we'd originally done, which we can do if it's not crypto-Catholic but Catholic, then we'll be okay. Well, freedom of speech under the First Amendment, I've also studied it really closely in law school, the history of the amendment. Guys like Ryan Grant and other such trads have not. There's something called the Zenger laws. Now, the Zenger laws, all they really meant was in other words, the First Amendment was based on the Zenger laws, and people can go look this up. All they stood for was the proposition that there would be no prior restraint. In other words, so the government knows you're going to give a talk that they don't like at a certain place at a certain time. Prior restraint on speech just meant they will not show up and arrest you before you give the speech. Under the First Amendment, under Zenger, which was a colonial thing, and because it was the common law tradition that carried on after the Revolution and after the constitutional regime was undertaken in 1788, 1791, Zenger laws were still in the books. So it was just all the First Amendment meant was no prior restraint. So the government could still arrest you for saying speech that had been proscribed, but they had to let you say it first. And so this was something that was most fundamental, most basic out of the, that Bernard Bailyn talks about, the ancient English Constitution. The Zenger, Blackstone and those guys say Zenger comes really from that tradition. So it's just an English thing from, the Magna Carta day, the Hale days of the ancient English Constitution and the Magna Carta days. It's nothing cutting edge. And it's really, of all the things that they can come at me about because they don't like the theses contained in the book Catholic Republic, that's the dumbest one of all. Because if you ask me or you ask any American Catholic political theorist, well, what do you think about free speech? How capacious do you think the body of speech rights should be? It's like, well, no, I'm perfectly fine. At the state level, the states are the ones with the police power. That's what the 10th Amendment guarantees us, the power to regulate health, safety, welfare, morals, and security. That all comes from the state, not from the Congress. States should be able to make basically any laws they want, and they should be able to proscribe the kinds of speech they want. But whatever, let's say in a 50 state, what Scalia called 50 forums of experimentation, you're going to have a gradient of rigorous anti-freedom of speech. And let's just say in the least free speech state, whatever amount of speech is left over, whatever amount of speech that you can do legally, the philosophical residuum, that's some amount of freedom of speech. The most lenient state of those 54 of experimentation, there will be more freedom of speech there, but it's a distinction of degree. It's not a distinction of kind. So it's really very silly for anyone to come at freedom of speech. Anyone who ever engages their larynx in their brain together to make a speech on any kind of soapbox in favor of Catholicism, against it, in favor of Taoism or whatever stupid other religion, you're using your freedom of speech. I'm not saying that if I defend freedom of speech or freedom of contract, freedom of property, that you have to go all the way. That's silly. So it's a reductio, really, that argument.
Okay. Andrew, you got anything else before we let him go?
No, I'm good. I'm just grateful, happy to have you on. I'm sure your book, Catholic Republic, you sell it on your website, right? Catholic
Oh,
Republic.
there it is. Yeah. No, it's still up.
First edition. And then he's got a bunch of other great books. Case for Patriarchy. Definitely worth the read. I mean, like Connor and I were alluding to,
I'll be right back. I'm gonna grab something.
A lot of Zoomers out there have been really influenced by your political writing and also your, I guess it's technically theology, but also philosophy. Case for Patriarchy. I know a lot of people who decided just to go ahead and get married and because of this book, and people who are a lot more engaged in actual Catholic politics because of Catholic Republic. So it's definitely worth the buy.
Thanks,
Definitely go check out this book right there. Ask Your Husband by Mrs. Timothy Gordon, Stephanie Gordon. I bought this for my wife for Christmas, and yeah.
You're like, read it. It's really a Christmas present for both of us.
Yeah. I joke with her all the time, like you need to pick up Steph's book right now.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, people think Ask Your Husband's going to be some anti-woman romp, and it's like not at all. It's just the nuts and the bolts of how to have a happy life and to really enjoy being around the house. Because anytime people get, particularly young people, which is who we want to be getting married, get married, they don't have a bunch of they have a bunch of habits from living with their families or maybe in the dorms at college, but they don't have the bad habits that 35, 40-year-olds have if they've lived alone for a decade or more after college. And yet they're starting with a clean slate without too many bad habits, but they still need a kind of primer on here's how to really enjoy living with someone of the opposite sex. Hopefully Zoomers will decreasingly have ever lived with someone of the opposite sex, the way it became very common for Gen X and millennials. And so it's just really a lovely little primer, Steph's book, Ask Your Husband, on how to really, really enjoy men and women living with each other. And of course, there are moral entailments, Catholic moral theology and moral philosophy entailments, but it's really not a heavy-handed book at all. It's a lovely corollary. Lovely co-read with the Case for Patriarchy. Thanks for that's funny, Andrew. You have both the first and second editions of Catholic Republic, and a good haircut too. Your hair looks good. I like it like
that. Yeah,
thanks.
I remember when I got this when you were teaching at my high school. I mean, this is the OG one where it all began. I think
better
they're substantially
edited.
The same though, aren't they?
Yeah. They're almost identically the same. It was one of those things where the editor edited some errors into Catholic Republic because I let them edit it. You should just never let people edit your work once you like how it's all framed out. But live and learn, I guess. Yeah, it's old school at this point. I was just talking to Royce White about, and Andrew, you and I were supposed to do a whole thing on this on Christian nationalism. And I was telling Royce he really needs to talk to Joel Webbin. And he's like, yeah, hook us up. But now that people are kind of starting increasingly to call for Christian nationalism, it's really important that they call for it the right way. And Catholic Republic is really the way to make an invocation, or a plausible, non-LARPy and correct invocation for Christian nationalism. And so I think this book is important once again, after, it's my first book, but we approach America's 250th birthday. And it's really important that people understand there is a right and a wrong way to do Christian nationalism.
Yeah, it can't be top down. It absolutely cannot be top down, because people are going to have adverse reactions to it. Like, it's like, yeah, it's cool to like think that like some figure gets into Washington D.C. and is this Franco-esque caudillo that we have for 60 years sitting in D.C. But I mean, it didn't work in Spain at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't work. You got to have it from the ground up.
Right. Francisco Franco had aura, but if you look at the efficacy of Spain overall, even as amongst other first world countries in Western Europe, it's not like he made it significantly cooler or more successful. He kind of had aura, but it didn't really work. I agree. Franco was cool in a lot of ways, but we need something that will actually work. And we've learned from a lot of the mistakes of the 19th and the 20th centuries. And really, I'm not trying to be cheesy or something, or hype up my own book, but Catholic Republic is operating on some principles that are timeless, and they go back 2,400 years. And it should be easy to avoid the mistakes of history. Knock on wood, famous last words, but that's how I'll close it out anyway.
Well, Tim, when you become governor of Mississippi, and then all of a sudden you end up like what's his name, Huey Long, the governor of the dictator of Louisiana.
Yeah, that'll be the day. All these Baptists get together and they're like, let's elect us a Baptist. I don't think so.
No, that'd be really funny. That'd be way too funny.
Well, thanks for having me on, and it's always good hanging out with you guys. I'll hang this on my channel too, and it's good. Yeah. Should be good content. Thanks for having me on your podcast. You should make sure you let everyone know what your channel is, so that once people come over to my channel, they'll know there's an adjacent one.
Yeah, so for people watching this on Tim's channel, we're called Upper Roommates. It's I'll send Tim the link, but it's just Upper and then Roommates, and the whole thing is that the upper room, Eucharist, our Lord instituted the Eucharist in the upper room, and then Andrew and I were roommates in college. He slept on my floor. When he had
on both your floors. You're both very generous. Yeah. Very well. No, Tim gave me a bed. Actually, Tim gave me the bed. I have to rank it to him. But yeah.
It's fair. I gave you a couch, and you still chose my floor. But I'm not gonna lie, that couch was pretty much akin to a floor.
That couch was like, it was like a hollow carpet. That wasn't even a couch.
Some floors are just better than some couches. You learn in college.
Yeah,
I learned that many years rocking in a rock band on road shows and stuff. Sometimes you want the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I'll send Tim the link. But Upper Roommates, come check us out. We're talking about Catholic political philosophy and theology, because it's something that's not talked about enough. And there's a lot of opinions out there, a lot of opinions that a lot of different people have. And I think that, just as Aristotle says, that I was taught by my very Thomistic criminal justice professor, everything's found. It's the golden mean. So you got to find the golden mean. I think Andrew and I are trying to set out to find that. So, But we appreciate everybody for joining. Come check us out if you're watching from if you're watching on Tim's channel. If you're watching from our channel, go check Tim out if you haven't already. And everybody have a great rest of your evening, and God bless.